We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday.
On March 7, 1965, what began as a peaceful march for voting rights in Selma, Alabama, ended in unthinkable brutality and violence. 600 civil rights demonstrators, peaceful and unarmed, crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge on their way to Montgomery, the state capital, were met with billy clubs and tear gas. The televised attacks showing the bloodied and injured marchers were seen all over the nation, prompting public support for civil rights and for the voting rights campaign. Today we refer to this day as America's Bloody Sunday, and it was a turning point in the civil rights movement. Recently, Bishop Kevin Brown and his wife Caroline, along with several other Episcopal bishops, went on a racial justice pilgrimage, crossing that same bridge in Selma, Alabama. We asked Bishop Brown about this trip and about his experience.
The experience and the sacred ground curriculum that led to it helped me understand that the history that I had been taught as a Southerner, and I really believe it's as all Americans, certainly white Americans, was woefully inadequate. That so much of the history I realized looking back at high school in particular, where we were supposed to get into depth, that history tended to of American history tended to talk about the early colonial era. It would go through the Revolutionary War. You'd hit on the War of 1812. We would talk about the country expanding out west and the fight for whether new states would be admitted as slave states or not. But we really didn't get into that. We leapt to the Civil War, did the Civil War, and then suddenly we leapt to World War I. We, in the history, may have spoken about the wars with the Indians out west, and it may have spoken about war with Mexico, or which happened before the Civil War, but it may have touched on these things, but basically we went from the Civil War all the way over Reconstruction, all the way over the implementation of Jim Crow, and next thing you know, we're now talking about World War I. And then we go on to the Depression and World War II. And you realize, wait a minute, why is it we skip over that? Did nothing happen? Well, a tremendous amount happened in our country. They weren't defined so much by wars, but it was defined by a reordering of our structure. That now that slavery could no longer be used to keep one segment of our population suppressed, other elements came into place. Jim Crow laws came into place to do, in effect, what slavery was able to do. And it wasn't until just a couple of years ago that I even had an understanding of the timeline for civil rights in our country. When was it that Martin Luther King Jr. was in the Birmingham jail? When did those protests happen, and why did they happen? When was it, even before that the young men and then men and women from North Carolina A&T University went to sit in at the lunch counters at Woolworths? And when was it that the bus boycotts in Montgomery happened, and what happened in Selma, and why were they going over that bridge? And so part of the learning was to not only say, I can learn about this in an abstract way, but I can go there.
I imagine there were several profound moments for you in this pilgrimage. Could you describe one of them?
There are many moments that were powerful, meaningful on the pilgrimage. A couple come to mind. One was the experience of walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the bridge that spans the Alabama River and leads out of the town of Selma into the surrounding county. And if you've seen the movie Selma, then you've seen recreated what happened in 1965, in March of 1965, when a group of peaceful protesters crossed that bridge. And once they got out of the city, they crossed the bridge, they got into the county, and that's where the sheriff and a bunch of vigilantes were waiting for them. And they were beaten, mercilessly beaten. Men, women, young people, all in this march. And it was powerful because the bridge itself is, if you see a picture of the bridge, you see that it's not huge, but it's physically imposing. It's an archway bridge made completely out of metal, and so you're not just walking over a bridge, you're walking through it and underneath a heavy iron structure named for a huge proponent of segregation and the supremacy of white Alabamans. And so to have his name representing the everything that was wrong that the protesters were marching about, to have them go through it, I could just feel it. So it was
Hanging over them.
hanging over them, right? And it was so much in the air to know that they were marching for the right to vote. Segregation had been ended by that point in time, but they realized that without the right to vote, they couldn't affect change, and they just simply wanted the right that they were already given. They wanted to vote and to not be impeded in that. Another really powerful moment was touring the Legacy Museum in Montgomery. The Legacy Museum is part of the Equal Justice Initiative, which was founded by Bryan Stevenson. He was born here in Delaware, and you may know him through the remarkable book that he wrote, Just Mercy. He moved to Alabama right after graduating from law school, went to work there to help folks on death row who had been sentenced unjustly, to try and help them receive legal aid, because so many of the folks there just couldn't afford lawyers, were not given lawyers who were trying to help them out. And in the course of that, realized that so much work needed to be done there, remembering the work of civil rights, the work of oppression. So the Legacy Museum is meant to tell the story of Black Americans, Black persons who were brought over, enslaved, and to tell their story. So the museum opens with a dramatic installation that helps recreate in a powerful way, not an overpowering way, but in a powerful way, the experience of a slave ship. And it begins with that narrative and what that might be like, and takes us through the history of Black persons, to be owned as property, to be denigrated and treated as lesser than. And even after slavery, the kinds of, to see just up on the wall, the very language that politicians would use, white persons would use, to try and keep Black folks suppressed. We can say that it's an unfortunate fact that in American history that people owned slaves. And some people will want to say, well, slaves have always been a fact of world history, and that's true. But as a way to say, well, slavery just kind of happened. What the Legacy Museum does is it helps show in very real terms what that's like. Not only seeing shackles and what that must have been like, seeing photographs of slaves that had been beaten, but to see advertisements. And there's one part of the museum that just has hundreds of newspaper advertisements for the sale of slaves. And it would have that so-and-so of such and such county is looking to buy so-and-so Negroes and needs some Negroes to do field work, but many more of them are people looking to sell. And and it would have the list of the Negroes and their names. When you see the books, right, and a list of property, and it would just have them all 20, 30 on a page of people who were owned by a slave master, and their names weren't even recorded. They were just, the slave owner's name was there. They were just considered pieces of property. And it helps just make the point that something very wrong happened, not just, another accident of history, but something very wrong happened here. It was It did not have to happen here. It was a system that was intentionally put in place. It didn't exist until the Europeans got over here and put it in place. But it brings that kind of reality alive. And so what I find inspirational about it, instead of it just being a complete sense of overwhelmingness and hopelessness, but finding inspirational, is that if these things are created by humans, they can be dismantled by human beings. If we can write the laws to put this stuff in place, we can remove those laws and write other laws to remedy the situation.
What is it you are bringing back from this trip, and how did it affect you as a Christian?
One, I'm bringing back from Selma and from Montgomery a rededication to this work, recognizing its importance, recognizing the depth that still needs to be done, and recognizing the profound number of advocates who are out there doing this work, the work of racial reconciliation, the work of justice. What I take away from this as a Christian is a profound, yet again, a profound love and appreciation for the teachings of Jesus Christ. That it was his teachings were at the root of what empowered those civil rights marchers, people like Martin Luther King and Abernathy and all the leaders who made such a profound difference. They were all rooted in the teaching of Jesus Christ. The idea that if we are going to transform things, that we, instead of becoming like those who oppress us, instead of resorting to the very violence that they use against us, we are going to retaliate forcefully but non-violently. And that's part of why I'm convinced that the movement works so well, is that when it succeeded, it was not there was not a conquering that went on, but a liberation that happened. And so that's from our faith. That's from our faith.
Transformation of hearts.
Transformation of hearts, a strengthening of the oppressed, a strengthening to not accept that the lot that was cast upon them is what they have to accept. So a resilience in Christ Jesus. You don't go to the cross on behalf of others. Christ didn't go to the cross on behalf of others as in an act of weakness. He went in an act of strength. And there's a real strength to this faith. So I bring back that, in a commitment that the work may be long, but that we can do this. We're a resilient people. We're a tough people. But if we forget as Christians that we are stronger united than we are apart, then we've forgotten the core of who we are. We are united as one in Christ Jesus. We need to live up to that. No one is unaffected by race in our country. And I recognize that as a white Southerner by birth, that while I had the ability to avoid almost all my life questions of race, I had the ability to do that because it was a privilege of mine that to not have to talk about race. But the reality is race affects me, and it affects in ways that I've never been able to recognize before. Not that I'm treated racially, but because when other people are mistreated, then I am lessened by that.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. we shall